Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar, Supporting You for Family, Friends and Carers. And now I'm going to welcome our guest panel this evening. We've got a great panel for you.
So, hello, I'm Charlotte Bloodworth. I'm one of the advanced nurse practitioners in Cardiff. I've been a nurse since 1995 and worked in haematology for the last 18 years. So I'm here really to share my experience from the hospital side of things.
I'm Angela Wayne. I'm a consultant psychologist. I specialise in cancer psychology, and I've worked specifically in that area for about the last 8 years. So I'm here to just have a think about anything to do with well-being or emotional well-being.
Hi, I'm Brian. Both my daughters have had lymphoma, Hodgkin's lymphoma. Firstly, in 1992-93 was my eldest daughter when she was only 20. And then in Christmas 2018, my youngest daughter was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. Both of them are in remission now.
I was going to introduce you to my colleague Anne, who's helping us tonight with the questions. So I'm going to hand you over to her, and she will tell you a little bit more about how the webinar came about, and then she'll move on to the questions.
Hello and welcome. For the purposes of the conference or the webinar, we're going to keep things simple and say that a carer means anyone who's supporting someone who has lymphoma. And that could be your partner, your friend, your son, your daughter, your brother and sister. That all is under that banner. The reason we're holding this webinar is really that our services are for anyone affected by lymphoma, and that includes anyone supporting someone with lymphoma. And we're very keen to get that message out there that we're for everyone. And we've been looking at ways to make it clearer to people that we're there for carers. And so far, we've recently produced a book called When Someone Close to You Has Lymphoma, which is specifically for family, friends and carers. And you can download or order that via our website. We are holding virtual support group meetings for carers. And tonight we're having this webinar. And as we've already mentioned, this will be available after tonight for people to listen to separately. We're going to start covering the role of family, friends and carers. And the first question is, in what ways might family, friends and carers be impacted by a diagnosis? And I'd like to put that to Charlotte first off, if I may.
So I'd probably say a lot. I think the impact is enormous, often more than it is with the patient. I think the patient is a bit shell-shocked and doesn't take a lot in, whereas the carers really do, and probably worry a lot more. So I think they're also the one that takes more information in. Again, I think with patients, you sort of say what's happening, and they sort of only take a little bit of that in, really. So I think there is quite a big burden on the carers to explain things and ask questions, and I think the impact, to me, I think it hits the carers before it actually hits the patients.
And what do you think, Angela? What's your thought on that?
Just really building on what Charlotte said, that all the research actually tells us that people who are caring, family and friends around someone with the diagnosis actually experience more worry and fear and concern than the person with the diagnosis themselves, just as Charlotte said, because they're taking in so much of the information, and also because they can end up feeling like they're holding an awful lot of responsibility, not only for the person who's got the diagnosis, but the whole family around them, and maybe all those other worries around finances, around work, around children or other family members. So there's a big load comes with that diagnosis, and that ripple that goes out, everyone gets affected.
And Brian, obviously you've had first-hand experience on 2 occasions with your daughters. Can you share with us the impact it had on you?
I think to start with, it was the first time, it was just a shock because I just wasn't expecting the diagnosis, and that was the biggest shock. And trying to come to terms with the diagnosis. But the second time, it was different because we knew what to expect in lots of ways. But my youngest daughter has 2 young children, and her concern was about the children, keeping them safe and making sure that they were okay and understood what was going on. So it was slightly different. My eldest daughter had to give up university for a year, which was hard for her, losing all her friends and then having to go back to university. I think the second time it was hard because we were trying to keep 2 young boys happy, and so that any concerns they had, you know, we were trying to make everything as smooth for them as possible, really.
Thank you. And Lindsay, I didn't catch your introduction because I didn't have the sound, so I'd like to ask the question of you, but if you could explain again your connection as a carer, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so my name is Lindsay. My partner Matthew was diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma in July 2020. So when we were in the midst of the pandemic. He's now in full remission. So good news around, but yeah, impact on families is absolutely massive. I agree with what everyone said. Matthew didn't really take in what was happening. It was a lot more of myself organising things, writing things down, researching. We have a young family as well, so it impacted massively on that side. Definitely hitting on finances, and I think I felt a lot of guilt for that, working as hard as I was, but also just worrying about the finances when you have someone that has cancer. Why are you worrying about finances? But the realistic side, you have to keep everything going. So it has a massive impact.
The next question is, in what ways the carer can support the person with the diagnosis of lymphoma? And again, if I can go to you, Charlotte, first on that one.
Yeah, so obviously carers are a massive support for patients, more than they probably realise. I was thinking of things like very practically. So to me, I love having somebody else there when you're giving a diagnosis, just because you've got an extra pair of ears, and you know, they pick up things that you know, others might not pick up, and ask questions as well, and prompt you to say a lot more than you would. So I think that's really supportive to have somebody else actually in the consultation. But I also love having somebody at home that's going to do that nagging. So I always say that, you know, please nag them, you know, nag away. You're allowed to nag away. You know, make sure they're drinking, make sure they're contacting us if they're worried, because that's another thing. I think people don't want to bother us, which to me seems crazy, because that's why we're here. You know, if they have a query or a bit of a temperature or something, you know, if they haven't got somebody behind them nagging them or wanting to look after them, saying, well, I'm going to phone, you know, I find it really, really useful. And I'd also say parking's a nightmare. It must be everywhere, you know, and just having somebody to support you. It doesn't have to be a family member, just a friend that can drop you off, or, you know, you can go to a consultation while somebody finds a parking space. You know, I think there are so many things that carers do to support people, and you know, a lot of them do go unrecognised.
And Lindsay, I can see you nodding. Does that resonate with you? And how did you find that you could support your partner?
It's just being that one person for them. Being there, I think, is everything. Listening to them, being that safe person that they can tell you their fears to. And what I found was really helpful for Matthew was just being the messenger, because Matthew, when you get a diagnosis, lots and lots of people want to know about it, but that one person can't repeat it that many times. So I remember just saying to him, I will do all of that. I will set up, you know, a WhatsApp, a cut and paste, don't worry about it. Things like, so we were in the midst of a pandemic, so I was lucky enough to be able to go to appointments with him. But I was able to go to his first chemo appointment, but then that was it. But I used to drive, drop him off and stay there, so I used to be on the phone to him the whole time, just so he knew I was there. When you get into a mid-cycle, you are having chemotherapy, I started to understand what he liked, what he didn't like, so I would have his phone meals ready for him. It's just things like that. I think the main thing is just being that one person and being patient with them.
And Brian, I'm going to come to you. Another thing I'm interested in is, you said your younger daughter had a family. So was she actually living with you, or were you living separately? And if so, did that have a different impact on the way you could support her?
Luckily, she was living a long way away to start with, and she'd only just moved to a place about 30 miles away. So we were able to travel. I'd retired, so I could go through and pick her up, take her to Hull for the treatment, and then take her back to our house. And the treatment was on a Friday, so she could stay with us for the whole of the weekend, taking the pressure off the work at home for her husband. Also, I was then able to bring her back here, and I was able to go pick up the boys, take them swimming, making sure that that was something that they could keep doing, and then bring them back so they could stay with us. But it wasn't easy for them. But the biggest help that we had was from a best friend. She turned up at the hospital for her first chemo, and she would come and see her every couple of weeks, every week. And she was just, gave us a bit of a break. And she was like a whirlwind coming in. She was all happy, and she just took the pressure off. And she was able to our daughter was able to talk to her and chat with her. And we were able to just have a break for an hour or so. And then, but after she'd gone, my daughter was just exhausted. But it was brilliant for that hour and a half. It just raised the spirits.
And actually that brings me very nicely to the next question, which was about the impact. Obviously, it sounds like it did have an impact on you, and I'd like you to share that. And also, I wondered whether you noticed an impact on her children, whether there was any change in how they behaved or their feelings and how you had to support them.
We tried to make everything as normal as possible for them, but they were definitely more what I would call clingy. They wanted to sit and cuddle with the mother, and the funny thing was, when she had a haircut, and she was going out with a turban on, they weren't very keen on that, but they did get used to it. They were upset, really upset, but came to terms with it. I think she dealt with it very well with them, and she wanted to include them in everything that was going on.
Thank you. And Lindsay, you've got a young family. Did you find that there was a big impact?
We were very lucky, actually. Well, lucky and unlucky. We were in the midst of a pandemic, so he wasn't at school, so he saw everything. There was no kind of shielding from him being poorly, throwing up, like that. So Roman, our son, was 11 at the time, so I was able to be very open and honest with him when we got the diagnosis. So when they were allowed back at school, we got a counsellor to speak to him and really kind of brought him back. I think for Roman, it was more to do with that he was done with staying in, because the problem that you forget about with children is he had to stay in for a whole year. There was no break of the pandemic. We stayed in, walked late at night. He wasn't allowed to see his friends, go to football, nothing. So I think that side of the psychological side of it was very difficult for him and me. So, but yeah, we were very lucky. We got through it. It's just talking. You just need to talk to them, and as a carer as yourself, to be able to talk to someone else. Because I didn't have Matthew's mum, my sister, best friends. We were seeing no one, all three of us. So it's just very important. You know, gosh, we had FaceTime and phones.
And Angela, would you like to add anything about other family members?
just listening to Lindsay and Brian really, Anne, and reflecting on that children in particular get affected in lots of different ways, and it depends on their age. So, you know, Lindsay saying her son's 11, that's a really difficult age anyway, isn't it? Life can be pretty confusing anyway. And when illness comes along, all those routines have changed, that adds to that confusion. And often they don't know quite what to do with it, whereas smaller children often manage to normalise that. And I think what Lindsay and Brian both said about being really honest and open, finding a language to talk to them about it. And that's whether we're talking about children or whether we're talking about parents or other family members, because that's another thing that can be really difficult, especially when a younger person gets a diagnosis. Parents can feel like they ought to be doing something, just like Brian, what are we supposed to do here, and feeling that responsibility. It can be hard to know what to do in that role. So sometimes just giving people a job to do can be really important, like Brian's saying about keeping the routine going around kids' activities. It's really crucial, and you know you're doing something that benefits everybody then.
And what about you, Charlotte?
I mean, I would say I absolutely agree. I think, you know, Brian and Lindsay have just said it straight there. You know, you've got to include everybody, you know, especially children, and about what's going on. You know, I think I would say try and keep life as normal as possible, which during COVID was impossible. You know, keep activities going. And I think not everybody wants to talk about things to their loved ones, you know, because it's too emotional. Whereas, you know, to wider family and friends, it's a little bit more easy to talk.
I wanted to, while I've got you there, Charlotte, I wanted to ask you also about what carers can do to support the individual that are practical, like physical, emotional support. Can you give us some tips on that?
Yeah, I thought that one was actually one of the most difficult questions, because I think everybody is an individual, and everybody wants different things. And I think, you know, some people you can do too much for, and it's too much for them. And some people, you know, want you to do everything for them. So I think it really depends. I think all you can say is, you know, I'm here. What can I do for you? And I think my advice to people themselves is to try and accept as much help as possible, because I think, you know, we're all fiercely independent as people, and we don't like to lose that independence. It's also nice for family and friends to be able to do something. So, you know, even if, you know, you don't want it yourself, let other people do things, because it's good for them as well. It's good for their mental health to be able to help.
And Angela, one of the audience have actually asked, are there any tips on how to support the individual without smothering them? What's your thoughts on that?
That's such a great question, because we all go into protect mode, and it can be really easy to think, best thing I can do here is wrap you in bubble wrap and pop you in a cupboard, and I'll just get you out for your appointments, or when I just want to check that you're okay, and then I'll pop you back in again. And it is the worst thing, like Charlotte was just saying, you know, that can stop people from testing out the things they want to do and feeling like they're still themselves. So again, it's having the conversations. I think it was Lindsay who said, keep it honest and open. Just keep talking and say to them, you can make a joke of it if you're worried about smothering them, and saying, look, every fibre of my being says, I'm just going to wrap you up and keep you in. And unfortunately, Lindsay had to do that for 12 months. But what you want me to do, it's just give them permission to tell you what it is they want and where the edges are. And that's the best thing you can possibly do with that.
And Lindsay, is that, how do you feel about hearing that, and what was your experience?
Yeah, definitely wanting to overprotect, over smother, but you do find a balance. I think the key is to try and keep things as normal as possible. So routine is fabulous. Know your routine on their, what we used to call them, their good days. Know a routine on their bad days, and you're not going to get a lot out of them on the bad days. Staying positive, going out for fresh air. We were on bike rides. Matthew was able to, which he really benefited from, was doing some cold water swimming as well. Obviously, we used to have to do it very early or very late at night, so we weren't near. But really, it is just being there for them and listening. And I think you're right. I think sometimes I did joke around with Matthew. When his hair started falling out, I used to say things like, I can't believe I've got a new partner. This is fabulous. You know, sometimes don't worry about it. When you're that close to them, it's okay to have a bit of a joke with them. And it might cheer them up on the bad days, just giving him a hug, really, and knowing that I was there.
What about you, Brian? What was your experience with your daughters?
So occasionally it was like walking on a tightrope. You didn't know what to say, and you didn't know whether or not you were saying the right things. That, especially like Lindsay was saying about bad days, good days and bad days. On bad days, you had to be sometimes quite careful about what things you would say and how you would deal with things. But on good days, you know, things were nearly like back to normal. And just supporting her as well, going out. That I think having no hair, especially for a woman, is a lot more difficult. And the first time that we went out, you know, that was quite a traumatic experience. But we were quite prepared for that, and we sort of, having gone through it before, you know, it was difficult, but we got through it, and all the friends were very supportive.
Thank you. If I can go back to Lindsay, I wondered, did you notice a change in your relationship with Matthew? And if you did, how did you manage that?
There was definitely a change, but if I'm being totally honest, it was very positive. Matthew used to work away a lot, so he used to work away 4 weeks at a time. So actually, we joked around and said this was the best thing that ever happened to us, because we were able to just be together for so long. But obviously the realistic side is, yes, it does change things. You know, there's times when you can't sleep in the same bed because he's not feeling well. You know, he's got sickness, I've got work the next day. I mean, that's what I think I struggled with the most, and I think he would agree, be guilty of. At first, it's you find out they have cancer and you're like, oh my gosh, and you want to do everything, but then the realistic side of it sets in. This is just your new normal. And actually, as the carer, you can become quite frustrated, not because they have cancer, but because you're doing everything, and I'm tired and I'm overwhelmed. So I started becoming quite snappy if I wasn't sleeping enough, or, you know, having to get up with Roman, or just simple things like that. So it definitely puts strain on the relationship, but really I think anything like that, I mean, for him to know that I was there for him throughout, for Roman that he was there for him, and that how I must stress, I still call him my warrior, and I think every day I still call him that, because they are warriors. And I think as long as you see that and say that to them, I think it just gives them empowerment.
Thank you. Angela, could you give us some insight as well about changes to relationships?
I think Lindsay said a huge amount of it there really anyway, but it can't help but change your relationship, because there's something has come into your life so significant that wasn't there before. So things have to move around, don't they? And things do inevitably change. And I think a big part of that is give yourself permission to just work out what that's going to be like. It's okay when things don't go right. And like Lindsay was saying, you are going to get tired, because you got tired before, you got snappy before. You had days when you loved each other madly and you thought you were the greatest thing each of you had ever seen, or whoever that is in your life. And there were days when you thought, oh, you are driving me nuts. That's not going to change because cancer's come into the picture. And so giving yourself permission to recognise that relationships are messy, because people are messy and things change, but there are ways to work it out, but it takes time to work things out, and that's okay. And going back to what Lindsay said before as well about laughing, it's all right to laugh and to bicker and all of those things. Now, one lady I worked with said her greatest wish was she just wanted her family to sit round the kitchen table and bicker like they would do round a normal meal, instead of everybody pretending that they were the Waltons, because they thought that was what they did. So be yourself and be as normal as you possibly can, and give yourself a chance to work it out.
And Brian, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Lindsay was saying about the financial implications. We were sort of lucky that we were able to take her to, well, I went down to the job centre and made sure that she was registered and got support from Job Seekers Allowance or whatever it was. I can't remember what it was called. That just took a little bit of the strain off, but that would have been difficult if she'd have been self-employed or something like that, or if she did, if her husband wasn't able to work. The things that we did meant that he could keep working and we could do the supporting, so that they didn't suffer too much financially.
Thank you. And Charlotte, do you want to add anything?
Well, only really that I think, having cancer really does change somebody. And I think, you're never the same person you were before all of this. And I think, to keep relationships going, you've got to grow together. And I think long term, people can really build a much better, stronger bond, than before the whole episode. But I think, treatment as well changes a person, and you just have to recognise that it's not the same person that it was before all of this. And I think that's important to remember and learn to love the new person.
Thank you. I'm going to now hand over to Karen, who's going to cover some of the other areas.
So we're going to look at the impact now on family, friends and carers. And so I'm going to come to you first, Angela. What is the impact of the caring role in individuals?
Realistically, if you think of it as being exactly the same as the impact of the cancer diagnosis on the person who received that diagnosis for the people in the caring role. So you can experience all sorts of things that can be, like Lindsay was saying, sometimes feeling resentful or angry, feeling scared, suffering from anxiety and low mood, but also being, your usual happy self. So there's a whole range of impacts on them, but as well, those physical impacts that come with that emotional load. Those things like exhaustion, about feeling quite isolated and sometimes not knowing how to tell other people what you're going through and what responsibilities are, or just not knowing what to do for the best. And that can be one of the biggest things. So being able to connect with other people and to find help wherever it's available, and as was said before, take that help. I think it was Charlotte said, just take the help is offered, is really important as someone who's offering care.
Thanks, Angela. And Charlotte, you're nodding there. Have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, again, this is a really difficult question because, every carer is different, as every patient is different, so the impact is different. A lot of people struggle with the financial things or the practical side of things. They might be working full time themselves and, not be able to fulfill that caring role and then just feel guilty all the time. It's a really potentially a traumatic time, really, which is why you have to accept all the help that everybody wants to give, really.
Thanks, Charlotte. Brian, have you got anything to add to that?
With regards to helping them, making sure that if they aren't well, that they do contact somebody and they talk about it, either Macmillan Nurse or through Lymphoma Action, through the website, or just ring up somebody and talk to somebody if they're not well, or if they do need extra help. Just being able to talk to somebody about it.
And thanks, Brian. And Lindsay?
Yeah, it's definitely physically difficult. My hair actually started falling out because I was so exhausted. Emotionally, I think I wanted to be superwoman, if I'm honest. I just wanted to be a super mum, super carer, super worker, and you can't do it all. Obviously, I didn't have much choice because of the pandemic. I had to just get on with it. But if I was to speak to myself now, if I was to go back, I'd say 100% make sure that the carer has a counsellor of some sort. But the biggest support I had was Lymphoma's Carers Group. It started at exactly the right time. Even if you are able to see lots of your friends as a carer and speak to your family, the one thing that they don't have is the same this experience. They don't really, they go, oh, it's awful. No, but do you know how awful it is? Now, Lymphoma's Carers Group, everyone's the same. You can all openly speak the same way. You can be very, very honest. I used to tell Matthew to leave when I was on those groups so I could speak honestly. So yeah, definitely a support group for a carer.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm going to stay with you, Lindsay, to talk about the recognising and acknowledging the positives and negatives. So can you talk a bit more about that, please?
Positives would be, obviously, you're spending more time with them. It's, like Angela was saying, it's a different relationship that you're having with that person. They are a brand new person. And I think if you are as well, I don't think I'll ever be the same person. The negatives, obviously, is the physical side, which I have hair falling out, maybe not eating as much as I should have, not sleeping as much. Maybe if you start to withdraw, I know that I did, I started to not wanting to pick up my phone anymore, not really want to text people. That's not like me. So I think it's about recognising that and actually just, do you know, I'd say be kind to yourself, allow yourself to say, actually, I'm not okay today and I'm having a really tough time. And I know I haven't got cancer, but I'm struggling with something, and seek help. I can't stress that enough.
Thanks, Lindsay. Brian, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, seek help, you know, if you need it. But I suppose but the thing is, everybody's different. Everybody needs different sorts of help. And the help that the carers need is different to the patient. And carers just need to be, I think the big thing is, once you know that the person is getting better and that you can, and you're helping with that, that's massive. That, you know, when you come onto that stage.
Well, now I'm coming to you, Angela. Can you add anything to that?
I think it's really just validating what's been said, that being able to notice the positives where they are there. And like Brian said, when you get to that point, you realise that you've supported someone through what's probably the worst time in their life. Can be a point where you can take a look back and say, well, if I can do this, then what does that mean about the other things I can do in life? And sometimes it can really change your perspective on so many things and make you see yourself as you actually are, rather than maybe what you thought you were. And we're very good at noticing the things we're not good at rather than the things we're good at. So especially if you've got some support, like Lindsay said, if you've got a counsellor, you've got a psychologist or a therapist, or another person to talk to, your support group to share with, it can help you to do that pause and look and realise actually what you're capable of, how robust and resilient you are, and what that means for the rest of life. And that's not trying to sugarcoat what is an incredibly difficult situation with all of those things we've talked about, the physical impacts, the emotional impacts.
Thanks, Angela. That kind of leads into the next question. So I'm going to stay with you, Angela. So how might mental health or emotional well-being be affected?
Well, I think, you know, again, we've sort of talked about quite a lot of this, or we've touched on it from everybody, haven't we? But if we're thinking about it in those broad emotional well-being terms, and we're thinking about that balance in different areas of your life and recognising what you need to be able to manage every day, we've already heard Lindsay and Brian say about how exhausting it is to be in that caring role, that you're holding so much responsibility for all aspects of life, for your loved ones' emotional well-being, their physical well-being, and socially keeping them active and well. So there's a huge burden there, and that's going to impact on your emotional well-being if you can't do that pause and say what's wrong. Well, so people can feel guilty, like Charlotte said, I should be doing more, I ought to be doing it all, I ought to be superwoman, as Lindsay said, you know, that I'm not quite getting this right. And that can understandably make somebody feel low, feel anxious, can make them go into a busy mode where they feel like they've got to do more, and that's going to get more and more exhausting. So I guess being very aware that there will be an impact on your well-being, there will be an impact on your mental health, because it would be pretty difficult for them not to be. You'd be more surprised that somebody wasn't impacted than that they were. And then being aware of that so you can reach out and get that help in whatever shape it takes.
Thanks, Angela. Charlotte, have you got anything to add to that?
Yes, yeah. So just going back to Brian's point, I think he hit on something really important there, in that there are different phases of this. You know, there's the treatment phase where everybody's anxious and, you know, there are lots of appointments, but there's also that recovery phase. And to me, that's often worse for the patient, because it's like post-traumatic stress syndrome, really. And really, I think, you know, family, friends and carers need to be aware that it's a completely different phase. And I think the worst thing that people say is, you know, come on, it's finished, get a grip, you know, let's get on with things now. You know, and that's the time when people are just thinking, oh my goodness, what's happened? So I think, you know, it's important to know that there are different phases through this, and everybody does need to adapt to the different phases.
Thanks, Charlotte. Brian?
My daughter had a funny, getting towards the end, and you're thinking, oh, like you were saying, we're getting towards the end, and you're thinking, oh, you know, we're doing really well, and everybody's getting through. She had her appointment for a scan cancelled, and I couldn't believe what an impact that had on her. The fact that, you know, this PET scan had been cancelled by a couple of days because they couldn't do it on those days. And it really did affect her. And to me, it was just a little thing. Oh, well, we're okay, we'll go tomorrow. But it really affected her, coming to terms with that. And it's little things like that where you think that you know how they're going to react, and you don't, because they're reacting different to how you thought. And the other thing she did was she wrote a blog about how she was feeling. And sometimes we would be thinking, oh, she's doing okay and this is all right. And then we'd read that blog and some of it was a bit dark. But then there was the happy times where she was reflecting on that. So that was difficult.
Thanks, Brian. Lindsay, I've just come to you on that point.
I went to Superwoman mode. Didn't want to feel anything. I just wanted to protect everyone else. And I actually found it incredibly difficult, strange enough, when he had his all clear remission. It was like every emotion that I have had in the start just came out, and it felt like I had a bit of a breakdown, I suppose. I just couldn't stop crying. Every day I was crying for about a week. And Matthew was actually okay, and then he started about 2 weeks later, so we took it in turns, really. But yeah, it is all about phases. I decided to start, when I was struggling, I started to write down how I was feeling in my phone on notes. So like every day I would be like, oh, actually it's not as bad as the day before or the week before. And again, it's very much important to realise as well what you have just been through. As we say, we very much focus on the negative and how we're feeling, but actually not having a look at what we have just done as human beings. So yeah, definitely affects your emotional well-being. So it's just staying in tune with being honest with yourself. It's okay.
Thanks, Lindsay. The next point here on the slides is talking about dealing with difficult emotions such as fear, anticipatory grief, anxiety, guilt, feeling overwhelmed. And I'm going to come to the next point and ask about self-care and coping strategies for physical health. Charlotte, I'll come to you for that.
Yeah, so I think they're very linked, this physical and emotional bit, but I think you can lose your capacity to do things so quickly, and that goes for carers as well as patients. And it's really important to sort of rehabilitate and get back, you know, a bit of activity. And you know, I always say walking outdoors in the fresh air is one of the best things you can do, more than anything else. Just getting out, it's good for your physical health, good for your bones, good for your mental health, and it just gives you a bit of breathing space. So whatever you're dealing with, you know, you can come back a little bit refreshed. So very linked, but that's what I'd say for physical health. I wouldn't say, you know, go to the gym or, you know, get a personal trainer. I really think just getting out there, experiencing the world, fresh air, walking.
Thanks, Charlotte. Brian, have you got anything to add about coping strategies for physical health?
Not really. It's just I've always tried to keep myself fit, and my wife has always tried to keep herself fit, and we just kept doing that. I think everybody's different as to what they can do, and we were lucky in some ways. It's not a very good
answer. I'll come to Lindsay then, and it's the coping strategies for you as well. You know, for you as the carer.
Walking, to be honest, walking. I definitely didn't talk as much as I needed to, so I would advise everyone, please just talk. That's the best thing you can do. But also respite for the carer. So when we were able to, after the pandemic, I started going every maybe 4 weeks just to my mum's for a weekend, and not having guilt about that. So my mum was looking after me like I was a 7-year-old child again. That was absolutely fantastic. So even if it's just an hour to yourself, a bath on your own, shut the door, read a book, just or going for a walk, putting music in just by yourself though, even if you can just do that an hour, I would massively advise that.
Thanks. Lindsay, can I ask you a question, because one of the audience have asked a question about whether you have any tips for asking for help and support. You've said that you went to see your mum, but how would you actually go about asking for that support, and how would you recommend to others to do that?
The first thing was getting over the guilt. So within your head is the hardest thing. It was getting rid of that. Actually, I need help myself. The first thing I did after that was speak to my partner who had cancer, and just discussed it with him and said, you know, do you think it would be a good idea? And oh my gosh, yes, that would be brilliant. And then just speaking to what I call them is safe people that you have told them, that you know that you can maybe go for a walk with, send them a WhatsApp, phone them up, or just call them, write them a letter, whatever. But make sure you do it. But yeah, I think just have no guilt. You only need a little bit of time. I can't tell you how much better you'll feel, and actually you're a better carer for it in all aspects, as a mother to Roman and to a carer for Matthew.
Because you mentioned that guilt there as well, and so yeah. I did want to come back to Angela with that. So maybe you could tell us about any coping strategies for physical health, but also then go on to tell us about coping strategies for emotional health.
I think if I was thinking about coping strategies for physical health, just really reflecting what everybody said, that do things that are meaningful for you. Like Lindsay said, you might only have 5 or 10 minutes to do something for yourself. So don't do something that you feel like you ought to do, whether that's somebody said, oh, you should go swimming or you should do this. Do something that matters to you for your physical health. And if that's sitting in a bath, then great, do that. If it's having a cold shower, do that. But if it's going and sitting in the garden for 5 minutes and pottering about having a weed, absolutely great. Whatever it is, make it meaningful for you, and feel okay about prioritizing that, but recognize as well that actually you need to pace yourself. I think Charlotte said when she started to talk about this, there's been a physical impact on you, and you might not be able to do things the way you used to do them because you're exhausted, because you've got stress draining your battery all the time and you're really tired. So it might mean you need to pace yourself in your physical activities. You might have cycled for, 10 miles before, but actually if you can go for a mile and you can sit and get your water bottle and have a drink, that's going to be just as good. And it's recognizing that that's still got value and it's still really important. And I guess that's where that mixes into our emotional well-being strategies, because all of those things are the things that make you feel better. We're not uncoupling these two things. If you do something physical that makes you feel better, that's your emotional gain. So don't think that emotional well-being strategies are just about sitting and meditating, although that can be really helpful and mindfulness can be fantastic and work out the right way for you. But the physical stuff you can do can be just as important. If cleaning your kitchen makes you feel like that's a big win, then that's something for your emotional well-being as well. If it's sitting down and doing your son's homework, when Lindsay was talking about her, then that again is a big win in terms of emotional well-being. The question you had before there about difficult emotions, and Lindsay touched on this, it's actually giving yourself permission to feel them and to know that they're okay. And that's when having things like a support group that says, you know what, yeah, I get absolutely raging angry, or I'm really grumpy, I'm really ratty all the time, and somebody else says, oh yeah, me too, means then that you're not morphing into an awful person. So talking and letting somebody validate that, you know what, that's okay, is a really important strategy for emotional well-being as well.
Thanks, Angela. Charlotte, have you got anything to add about the coping strategies for emotional health?
I think doing something creative is really helpful. And as Angela says, some people might not like that, but even just trying it, honestly, doing some painting or drawing, something you would never normally do, it just takes you out of your life really and just gives you a bit of headspace. And when you are doing things creative, you're only thinking about that creative thing. So whether it's dancing, singing, anything creative, I think creative things are definitely really good for the emotional health. It just stops you thinking about things, and it can get your emotions down in a painting or a drawing, and you deal with things in a way that you wouldn't have before. So I'm a big fan of being creative.
Thanks, Charlotte. So Brian, were you creative, or have you got any alternative methods to strategy?
Cycling, swimming, golf, just try to do the things that I could do and fit them in if I could.
That worked for you?
Yeah, and walking the dog.
Yeah, I'll go with that. I'm a dog person myself, so I'm with you on that one. Lindsay, how about you?
To be honest, even if I got 5 minutes to walk outside the house on my own, because I mean, you can imagine we have a dog as well, but I even got to the point where I didn't want to see the dog. I mean, it was there. I was just wanting to just be on my own with my own music. So it was walking really. That was my thing. I so wanted to meditate. I so wanted to paint. I wanted to do all of the things. I'm a singer as well, so I wanted to sing, but there was just not the emotion. There was nothing in me. So what I would say is these are all fantastic suggestions, and if you can do it, but what I'd say is don't feel guilty if it is just a walk. If it's just a 2-minute walk, I promise you it will feel so much better.
That's really a great way to answer, to complete those questions. So we're just moving on now to looking at sources of support that are there for you from Lymphoma Action. So we've got this book that Anne mentioned earlier, When Someone Close to You Has Lymphoma, and that can be downloaded, or you can oh, fantastic, we're not paying you for that product placement, Charlotte. There's our helpline, of course, and that number, that 0808 808 5555 number, is on all our publications. It's in the magazine. the helpline is open every weekday from 10 till 3, and that's for information and emotional support. And that we have a buddy service, and so that's a peer support. We have trained volunteer buddies, and if you're interested, contact the helpline for more information. Lindsay mentioned our online support meetings. We've got one specifically for family, friends and carers. We've also got one for younger people as well. And we've got our UK closed Facebook group. So you're very, very welcome to come and join that too. And Anne's going to go through some other sources of support for you.
You'll see on the screen some sources of support, and actually you will be able to get these off our website, and you'll probably be able to click through to them, and they'll also appear at the end of the video. Another thing I would add is that the next issue of Lymphoma Matters, the summer issue, is due to go out very shortly, and it actually includes a wellbeing pull-out that Angela helped us produce, and you might find some really helpful ideas and tips on that. I don't know whether we could have the other slide so that people can have a look through there, and there's a couple of other areas that may prove to be valuable.
Thanks, Anne. And thank you everybody who's joined us this evening, and thank you very much to our guest panel, to Angela, to Charlotte, to Brian and to Lindsay. And just as another small reminder for you, there is our helpline number again, and you can call for general enquiries to the other number there. So thanks very much everybody, and good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.